just want to touch on where the research is at this point in terms of the cause or etiology of homosexuality. So, brief summary. There is the bulk of the research has been done on the genetic component of homosexuality, and this is accomplished by looking at twins. But before I talk about what we have found in terms of genetic components, is that researchers have discovered that in general, women tend to have only slight to moderate degrees of homosexual attraction, while men are more likely to have high degrees of homosexual attraction. So what this is saying is that women aren't so exclusively or intensely sexually drawn to the same sex. Men tend to be much more exclusive in their sexual attractions. They are only sexually attracted to the same sex, and often their sexual feelings are very intense. So there is a difference right off the bat in terms of how women experience their same-sex attraction, and we will say more about that. So when it comes to genetics, what researchers are looking for is they're looking at identical twins, and they are observing the incidence of both children or young adults, both having same-sex attraction or both being heterosexual. Because it's understood scientifically that an identical twin shares the same chromosomes as their twin. And so if there is a gay gene or some kind of chromosomal influence, then both twins should be experiencing the same thing when it comes to sexual orientation. Okay, that's the theory. But as studies have improved over the years, they've discovered that it's about 20%. There may be around 20 to 24% of the explanation of homosexuality or same-sex attraction might be due to some kind of genetic or biological factor. So that's where we're at with the genetic research. In general, this study in particular, which is one of the better studies, did not provide statistically significant support for the importance of genetic factors. It's certainly suggesting that there's something maybe biologically going on, but it's not the sole explanation. And again, at least in the United States, the media has no idea about the research. I mean, everybody casually says homosexuality is genetic and you're born gay, but that is not what the research is showing. This same study also looked at gender nonconformity, which we haven't talked about yet, but gender nonconformity, for those of you who don't know, is when a small child will tend to be interested in the play or activities of the opposite gender. So little girls would prefer to be climbing trees, playing with trucks, maybe working with tools. A little girl like that is considered gender nonconforming because she's not following in the gender normative role. So a little boy who is interested in art and reading and maybe flower arrangement or cooking is considered gender nonconforming because in general most boys want to be outside playing sports, being rough and tumble, and this boy doesn't. So there is a strong correlation between children who experience gender nonconformity and later adult homosexuality. And it's very strong, significantly strong correlation, and I find it so interesting that no one is doing more research on this, except that it's not politically correct these days to study homosexuality and causal factors outside of genetics. So we're kind of stuck with the research. But this study found that gender nonconformity itself may have a very strong genetic basis. And I have observed, that has been my impression in working with women, and in fact, this is a part of my own life. I was gender nonconforming growing up. I was called a tomboy. And I actually grew up in Alaska, which is kind of the wilderness. And I loved going out into the woods and exploring and climbing trees and playing with mud. And I loved the outdoors, and I loved being very active. I like athletics and sports. And I love working with tools. I'm better with tools than my husband, and he doesn't like that, but I love tools. And I have discovered in taking college entrance exams that my brain works, I am extremely logical and analytical in how I think. And in general, my brain is more like a man's brain. I was never good with verbal skills. I was never good in English, which is usually where women have strengths. So I was gender nonconforming, and I have come to believe that that is very much a part of how I was made and created, and that there is some biological, genetic, God, created me this way. And the more that I've sat with women, it appears that these are also just genuine interests for them. This is where their passions lie, are in engineering and in mathematics and in science, versus the careers that might be more populated by females. Now, there are some cases where a little girl was desperately unhappy in terms of her closeness with mother, and mother was the one who stayed in the kitchen and who stayed within the home and did all of the household chores. And this little girl was very, very, very unhappy in relationship with mom, and very uncomfortable with staying close to mom. And so this little girl forced her way out of the house, out into the outdoors. She found ways to be able to play with the boys. She didn't want to play with the little girls. She didn't want to have anything to do with femaleness. And so she learned how to do the boys' games and learned kind of how to socialize with the boys. And these girls may not be inherently gender nonconforming, but their gender nonconformity may be a defense. It may be defensive, where they're just attempting to survive life. And they've got to fit in somewhere, and they just did not feel like they fit with mom or fit with females, and they had to find another place to fit. But most of my clients, I really believe, just God has gifted them in very unique gender non-conforming ways. But we will talk a little bit more about why I at least have a theory on why gender nonconformity is strongly correlated with adult same-sex attraction. So we'll get there. So this study that really did start out to be a genetic study had to conclude that there are many other factors that influence the presence of homosexuality in an individual's life. So they concluded that family factors are an influence, and childhood gender nonconformity. Family factors influence also gender nonconformity, which is part of the story that I just gave. And family factors influence gender identity, how a child identifies themselves as male or female. This is different than sexual identity. So that there are family factors, and yet it's not politically correct to study that now in the States. So researchers cannot get the grant money to do the research. And so we're left with speculating, we are left with anecdotal evidence, which is what I have sitting with the women for all the years, but we are also left with a free open space to theorize, right? To come up kind of with our own theories and explanations. So the inheritable factors or the genetic biological factors, first of all, it's not conclusive that it's the sole factor. The influence is small, 20%, and it is ill-defined. We don't know what the underlying mechanisms exactly are, because pretty much genetic scientists know that it's probably impossible to have such a thing as a gay gene. That does not work. So we don't really know. We can't really explain what are the biological or genetic, more inborn factors that might influence an individual to have same-sex attraction down the road. I want to talk about Dr. Lisa Diamond. She's an associate professor of psychology and gender studies at the University of Utah, and she has conducted several longitudinal studies following sexual minority young females, or females who have had same-sex attraction at some level. And what she's been following are the changes that occurred in their lives in terms of their sexual feelings, their sexual behaviors, and their sexual identity. And this is the researcher I mentioned earlier, who is arguing against the conventional assumption that sexual orientation is a stable, early appearing trait. That it's stable and it cannot and does not change. She believes that there is variability in the emergence and expression of female same-sex sexuality. She believes that there are many different developmental pathways that might lead a woman to experience same-sex attraction. So this goes counter against all of the gay affirmative agenda and gay affirmative research, which has been primarily done and established by men. So it's funny, because this is how psychology has worked since Freud, is that most of the theorists have been male, and they have studied human beings, they have studied growth and development, but they have done so from a male model. And we are different. There are different processes that males versus females go through in terms of development. And so it's not surprising that in this field, in terms of understanding same-sex sexuality, that when women now have come onto the scene and started doing research, and we are researching females, because most of the research on homosexuality has been done on males. So now we're starting to study the females, and we're finding something different. So here are some findings that Dr. Diamond has made, which is very, very important. First of all, it used to be assumed that if a person had same-sex attractions at a very early age, that it was assumed that then that means that they are gay, that they are homosexual, and that they will continue to be homosexual for the rest of their life. They will have a stable sexual orientation, which means a stable pattern of same-sex attraction, same-sex behavior, and same-sex identity. It's a done deal, in other words. Okay, so this is what the male research has kind of uncovered, and these were conclusions. But she's saying no, that just because a young girl has same-sex attraction at a young age, it does not necessarily mean that for the rest of her life she will only experience same-sex attraction. She found that many of these young women later in life experienced opposite sex attraction and same-sex attraction. This is another finding that she made. She discovered that same-sex attraction for women is qualitatively different than same-sex attraction with men. For the most part, men, their attraction is very sexually based. It's very sexualized. There is a lot of focus on the other man's body. It's a very visual sexually based attraction. This is not the case with women, and this is consistent with female sexuality in general. We women tend to not just be physically based in our sexual attractions, but emotionally based. So for women, often we need to have a relationship established. We need to know that this person is trustworthy and that they like us. We don't just want to have sex with anybody because we think they're pretty. We want to know that there is trust and that there is respect and that there is this emotional connection in our relationships before we enter into a sexual relationship. Now, obviously, that's not 100% true. Women are sexual beings and have sexual desires and will enter into a sexual relationship without any relationship. But I'm speaking in general terms. The research that's been done around female sexuality in general is that we want to have this emotional connection. And so Lisa Diamond discovered that for women with same-sex attraction, that it is very, very common for women to have nothing but an emotional attraction to another woman. It is really not based in a desire for sex. It is based in a desire to be close to this woman, to be loved by this woman, to be possibly in her arms. But over the years, my clients would say over and over again, Janelle, I don't care about the sex part. If we never had sex, if all we did was just hold each other, I would be happy. So that's what Dr. Diamond discovered, is that it's 5 times more likely for a woman to have purely emotional same-sex attraction when compared to men. This is a significant difference in working with men and women with same-sex attraction. And those of you who have already been working with men know that you will be spending a lot of time looking at the sexual fantasy, looking at the sexual behaviors, looking at the sexual impulse. You will not be doing that with women. There will be very little work around the sexual fantasy and the sexual behavioral patterns. What you will be exploring with women is this deep emotional draw and these emotional longings, because they're telling us things about the women. So another important feature about women is that often this is the continuum where it's purely sexual or much more emotional, and in some cases where women aren't really even sure what the nature of their attraction is. They just know that they're drawn to certain women. They're just drawn to certain women. But I've worked with many women, especially those who are older and have been married to a man for, let's say, 20 years. They've raised their family. They've never had same-sex attraction. But they are at a point in their life where they're realizing they're very dissatisfied. The marriage it has been disappointing. It's not been what they wanted. They do not feel this emotional connection with their husband. And they enter into a time of depression. And along comes a new girlfriend. Along comes a new woman who may be going to her church or parish, and they become close friends. And the woman is very much appreciative and very enjoying this new friendship. And in fact, this is what happened at church years and years ago, is that these two women who had become friends, one of the women was married with 3 children and had never experienced same-sex attraction before. But in the midst of this friendship, it feels so good. Finally, some of her emotional needs are being met. Finally, somebody is taking the time to know her, to look into her eyes, to understand her. And when it's another woman, we women, we enjoy each other because we kind of understand each other. We kind of, I know that, you know. So this kind of mutuality is very powerful, especially for a woman who has been lonely for 20 years in a disappointing marriage and maybe didn't have close girlfriends. And so this friendship becomes so powerful, and the woman who's been kind of struggling with depression begins to feel like she cannot continue to do life, in fact, without closeness with this girlfriend. This girlfriend is beginning to take on all sorts of meaning for her. And she is her best friend, she is her support system, she is her confidant. In fact, there's times when she even feels like my mother, you know, and I'm getting all these nurturing needs met, and it becomes more and more dependent. It becomes more and more essential for this woman to stay connected with her new friend. And that can eventually move into long hugs, some physical affection, where now the felt need for this woman becomes even stronger. Because physical touch is bonding. It's very powerful when we start touching somebody, holding somebody in non-sexual ways. It's still very powerful. So this woman is, all she can think about is this other woman. And will eventually maybe have some dreams where the relationship is sexualized, or she may have a fleeting fantasy of a sexual interaction with the woman. And if the other woman is feeling the same way, which often is the case, all of a sudden they discover themselves feeling like they have fallen in love, and that they can't bear the thought of separating or being without each other. And the relationship becomes completely romanticized and eroticized. But that is the only woman that this woman loves. If you sit with a woman like this, she will not say she's lesbian. She won't identify as lesbian at all. She will say, but Janelle, it's only her that I love. And I've walked with many married women, women married to men, who are end up in this affair with another woman. And it feels so natural to them. It just feels like she is my best friend. And it's very hard for them to even come to grips with the fact that they're being unfaithful to their husband, because it just feels right and it's meeting their needs. And if these relationships break up, the woman will not now be interested in looking for more women. She does not feel lesbian. It was just that one woman that somehow took on all of this meaning, and she started meeting all of this need, that the relationship became romanticized. So this rarely would ever happen to a man, but it's not uncommon with women. And there are some women who do divorce their husbands and decide to live with this new female friend for the rest of their life. And so they really do enter a long-term lesbian relationship, and yet they would never claim that they're lesbian. We women are a little crazy sometimes. We just, we can be very complex as females, and you'll see this with same-sex sexuality. Okay, so interesting. This survey, National Survey of Family Growth, shows that across the lifetime, many women, more than men, report same-sex contact. We women do seem to have this fluidity, that we can have some type of romantic feelings towards our girlfriends and same-sex behaviors. We're much more apt to report that type of fluidity than men are. Okay, Lisa Diamond is also beginning to observe in the new generation of young people that young adults are engaging in sexual behavior for many reasons. It's not just because they have same-sex attraction, but they will, and we know this is for heterosexuals too. This is not just for kids with same-sex attraction. that we sometimes engage in sexual behaviors to relieve stress, to reduce negative feelings because it kind of feels good. We will connect with somebody romantically because it gives us a sense of status or a sense of intimacy and closeness. It may give us a sense of identity, that I'm wanted by this person and therefore I'm valuable and worthy. It sustains closeness, companionship, or they're looking for excitement. We can't forget that these are all reasons why heterosexuals engage in sexuality at times, where it's not within the covenanted relationship of a marriage partner, right? We're acting out sexually often for all of these reasons. So it's not uncommon to see kids who tend to be more attracted to the same sex to be acting out sexually for all the same reasons. They're no different. And again, it's something to keep in mind that when you're working with same-sex attraction, sometimes we judge the behavior as it is immoral. It's just immoral, and so that's the end of the story. But it's very important when you're working with kids or adults who struggle with sexual behaviors that aren't really in line with their religious convictions, is to explore what's really going on. What are they really wanting? What are they really needing? Because while it may be immoral behavior, there's a reason, there's meaning, and we need to sit with people to unpack what is really going on. And so as a Christian counselor, I have learned to I don't spend a lot of time moralizing with my clients. I don't spend a lot of time judging, what I believe is right or wrong, because it doesn't help them understand what this is about for them. And so I offer much grace, because I believe that God is full of mercy and grace, and He understands that we are all a mess. We are all confused. We are all in need of His mercy and grace. And so I try to extend that to my clients so that they feel the freedom to talk about their sexuality, which is also, it's very hard to talk about. This is a very personal, often shameful part of our life. It's very difficult. And so I need to go out of my way to let them know that I am not here to judge them. I am not here to moralize. I am here to hear their story and help them understand why they do some of the things they do, why they feel the way they do. And also to begin to meet possibly some of the underlying needs, to heal some of the underlying traumas or abuses, so that they will become a more full person to be able to make better choices for themselves. Because we do have choice. We do have choice in terms of how we live. We may not be able to change all of our feelings, but we still have choices on how do we live, how do we behave, who do we want to be in the world. Okay, it's also been found that females engage in same-sex behavior often because of safety issues. And I've already said this, men do not feel safe. Men are not safe for whatever reason. And so to gain a sense of emotional closeness and possibly physical affection, women will turn to other women. And I've also heard a lot of my clients say, especially the women who are married to a man, they will say, it's just not fully satisfying, Janelle, because a man's body is hard. And I just want to be enveloped. I just want to press into something that is soft and warm. And so can you hear that mother image? Almost you can see this small child who just nestles into mother's bosom and just relaxes into this softness. And I hear that coming out of my clients, that this is what they're really longing for. Okay. So, another finding is that the intensity of same-sex attractions and intensity of opposite-sex attractions vary for women especially. So in other words, what Lisa Diamond found is that even though all of the women she studied reported same-sex attraction, they also reported opposite-sex attraction. And she found over the years of her study that the intensity of same-sex attraction went up and down and up, and the intensity of opposite-sex attraction went up and down and up, and that these women were just constantly evolving and changing. In fact, their behaviors, the frequency of engaging in a same-sex relationship sexually would go up, and then it would go down, and pretty soon this woman is with a man, and she'd engage in heterosexual behavior. And so behaviors, we were just finding this. And then finally, I think what surprised Lisa Diamond is that the women changed their sexual identity labels. They would define themselves as lesbian, and then 2 years later, they would define themselves as bisexual, and then they would call themselves heterosexual. Over 50% of the women changed their identity label more than once. Many of the women in Lisa Diamond's studies who had been lesbian, they had very early same-sex attractions. They had been in primarily lesbian relationships. But by the end of this longitudinal study, they had fallen in love with men, and they were in committed relationships with men. So, wow, what do we make of that? It's certainly telling us something about what we call sexual orientation is not this stable construct within a woman's life, but in fact, sexuality seems to be very fluid, seems to evolve, it seems to be spontaneous. So Lisa Diamond concluded that female sexuality is much more situation dependent than male sexuality. So in other words, a lot of the interviews that she did when she's observing all of this change in a woman's feelings and behaviors and partners is that a lot of it depended on the situation that the woman was in. A lot depended on her relational networks. If there were no men available, then she might lean into a female relationship. Or if she had lots of great female friends, feeling really good about herself as a female, that she might be more open and able to explore a relationship with men. So a woman's context mattered deeply, and it does matter deeply. So this is where she began to say, okay, what do we call this? And she's really the one who started using the term very regularly in terms of fluidity. That female sexuality is fluid. It is so based on a woman's context. It's so based on her emotionality. It's based on, and she's gone on to say, it's based on her personality type. It's based on her beliefs about herself. It's based on her beliefs about her attractiveness. It's based on her former attachment patterns that maybe were in the family system. For instance, here's an example. What about a little girl who grows up with a mother who is very, very needy? Mom did not get all of her needs met as a child. Mom still has a need herself for secure attachment, to feel like she's really tied into somebody who can take care of her and meet her needs. And so mom is still looking for her own needs to be met, and she looks to her daughter. So her daughter actually becomes her closest friend. And mom tells the daughter everything about her life, including her problems in her marriage, tells her about all of her heartbreaks, and the daughter is a smart little girl, and she's sensitive, and she listens, and so she's taking all this in. But what's happening is the roles have switched. And so the mother, in a way, has become the daughter, and the daughter is parenting her own mother. She's having to be the big person to listen and take in all of mom's problems. And this can be very, very detrimental to a girl's development, because the little girl is still wanting and needing a mommy to take care of her. And instead, she's having to somehow be big and take care of mom. But it's what she's grown up with, right? It's what she knows. And so she finds ways to survive, and she turns into a teenager, and the pattern continues. Mother and daughter are inseparable because daughter still needs mom, and mom is still really relying on daughter and needing daughter. And so they're very close. There's no sense of mom has been mean or angry or rejecting. They really are at some level best friends, even though the daughter feels empty. The daughter knows that there's an emptiness. So the daughter goes through school and maybe to college, and finds that she's still very drawn to female friends. She wants to be very close to female friends because she still has some needs. And so she finds female friends, and she becomes best friends. And they become very, very close, and they share everything, because that's what she knew. She doesn't know how to just have a much more relaxed friendship. She only knows about becoming best friends, and you spend all your time together, and you tell each other everything that's going on, because this is the attachment pattern that she grew up with. In a way, it's like she literally learned how to be emotionally dependent on another female. That was what she was given. And so these attachment patterns have huge implications on how we relate as adults. And you can see certain patterns with some women where they're in love with women because that was their whole world was about enmeshment or connection with mother. She hardly even had a life separate from mother, because mother defined the relationship at some level. And then gender nonconformity. Again, Lisa Diamond is also observing that gender nonconformity seems to be very related to female same-sex attraction. And the way that I would describe that is, again, a little girl who would prefer to be outside playing with the boys, playing baseball, soccer, she's not gaining an experience of being in girlfriend circles. She's not being socialized with the girls, but is being socialized with the boys, and is beginning to identify with the boys. And she may wear short hair, and she may change her name to be a boy's name, and she may want to wear only boys' clothing, because she fits in. She feels like she fits in with the boys. And she's not interested in dolls. She doesn't want to play little girls' games. She does not want to wear lipstick. She has no interest. The problem is when puberty hits, all these little boys that have been her friends, best friends up until now start noticing girls. And there's two things that can happen for a little girl here, is that these boys who used to be her best friend are now no longer interested in her, because they literally see her as one of them. And they start noticing the other girls. These boys were her best friend, and now they don't even care about her. They don't even want to play with her anymore. So she feels absolutely alone and abandoned. Or what can happen is that these little boys do know that she's still a girl, and they may begin to sexually abuse her because they're curious, they're exploring their sexuality, and they end up using her to do their explorations. So that's very devastating for the girl. But either way, what happens is that this girl usually is left all alone, and she's starving for connection still with the other girls. She knows now she does not fit in with the boys, but she doesn't feel like she fits in with the little girls. And so she'll start watching other girls and start feeling like she wants to maybe be close to this girl, or she wants to be like this girl. She wants to learn in a way, you know, how do I do this? How do I navigate? How do I become a girl? And again, that need, that same-sex need, can become very confused emotionally and sexually. So it's not surprising to me that gender nonconformity often results in a deep insecurity within the gender nonconforming girl or boy, that I don't belong with my same sex. I don't fit in. I fit in better with the other sex. And so it leaves this question mark of, am I enough? Am I good enough? For a boy, it's, am I adequate to be a boy? And for a girl, it often is, am I even pretty enough? Or I don't even know if I want to be a girl. I think I hate being a girl. You will often hear females speak more in the language of, I hate being female. I hate being a girl. Why didn't God just make me a boy? You won't hear that so much with the boys. You will hear more this deep inferiority, this deep sense of inadequacy, that I just do not have what it takes. I am a failure as a boy or as a man. So a little bit different. This self-hatred that can form in a female is a very serious issue that we need to deal with, because as long as a female hates herself, she's rejecting parts of herself. She's cutting off aspects of possibly her femininity, but possibly other aspects of her personality, and she's literally emptying herself. She's literally becoming emptier and emptier through self-hatred. And as human beings, we cannot survive with deep emptiness inside. There is something in us that says, I must have connection. I must get full again. And so it's this emptiness, absolute sense of aloneness in a woman that can create a urge to connect with another woman. Men aren't safe. When a woman feels this empty, you know, men are not going to necessarily be where she goes. Women are much safer and much closer to who she is, where she's reaching out desperately to be loved, desperately, frantically to be loved. And so it begins to form, again, kind of the basis for same-sex attraction. But remember, for women, it's emotionally based more than it is sexually based. This is just some other conclusions that Dr. Diamond has made, that she's recommending that we move beyond the old model of believing that sexual orientation is this unchangeable, stable construct. But in fact, attractions, behavior, and identity changes. And so she is recommending that we begin to consider all of a woman's experiences and all of her contexts in terms of interpreting and understanding her same-sex attractions as well as her opposite-sex attractions. So unfortunately, this research has not reached the public, and I don't know if it ever will, but it has allowed me to continue to be very passionate about talking about working with women in the way that I do, for women who have a values conflict They have beliefs based on their religion or spirituality that this is not who they were meant to be or who they were designed to be. So this gives me a platform to be able to say, absolutely, let's dive in and understand your life. And I love this, and Lisa, I don't believe Lisa Diamond is homosexual. She might be, I don't know, but I know she's very, very pro-gay. She's very gay affirming, and yet I love this research that she's doing. But this is what she suggests. Because there is no bona fide way to separate true sexual minorities from curious heterosexuals. In other words, we don't even know anymore who's who, because there's just so much fluidity and change. We must become non-judgmental sounding boards so that youth can reflect openly and honestly about the quality and personal relevance of their experiences in a safe, pressure-free environment. And that is the platform that I have always sought to stand on, is that I am inviting the women to come into my office, and I am not going to pressure them. I am not going to judge them. I'm going to let them begin to explore in a safe place what is going on in their life. And I love this second paragraph where they say, counselors and educators might also remind youth that no single romantic experience can prove one's true sexual identity. And no single relationship can be counted on to put a definitive end to their sexual questioning process, or that somehow that it's determinative of their sexual orientation. Because there's so much more to life, and this youth may completely grow and change and develop in a way that they no longer have same-sex attraction at all. So again, I'm just very, very amazed at her research. So there is a body of research that she has published at this point, and those of you who are like to read research and are working with the women, I would really encourage you to get into all of her studies. They are fascinating and most excellent. Okay, but now we've talked about fluidity, where women spontaneously change the intensity and the frequency and all of this with their attractions and behaviors, right? So let's be clear, though, what that's telling us. It is definitely stating that there is spontaneous change for some women. And it's also telling us that sexual orientation may not necessarily be a stable, fixed construct in an individual's life. But it is not necessarily telling us that when a woman comes to us with intentional desire to change, she's not, this is a woman who is not spontaneously experiencing change, but she wants to. So she comes to us with an intent and desire to see if aspects of her sexuality, her feelings especially, can begin to change. This is different than what Lisa Diamond is speaking about. She's talking about the spontaneous evolution. So her research is not necessarily saying because women are spontaneously evolving and are fluid, that every woman who wants to change factors of her sexuality can change. She's not saying that. But what it does tell us is that there's potential. There is a potential for a woman possibly to experience shift in her sexuality. But I am always very, very careful when a woman comes into my office and says, Janelle, I want to change. I don't want to be gay, I want to change. I'm very careful at saying, oh yes, you can change, and we will go about the work to make sure that you change. I can't say that because every woman I worked with has experienced different types of changes, different degrees of change, different aspects. And so I never know where a woman is going to end up in the process. But what I can tell her is that we are going to work together probably for a long time. And in this process, you as a woman, you're going to grow. You're going to change. You're going to, I hope that your world becomes much bigger and fuller. And I hope that you live out the life that you dream of. That I know is possible. But whether you completely extinguish or get rid of same-sex attraction, I can't guarantee. But in some ways, when a woman heals and grows and becomes much more settled with her femininity, or much more happy with who she is, she doesn't hate herself anymore, she doesn't live in shame anymore, she understands her life, she may even understand why she has same-sex attraction. When a woman is living in that way, now she has the power to choose. Now she can choose how she wants to live. She can choose when some temptation comes up and she feels attracted to a woman, she can choose. And she can say, Janelle, you're so wonderful, you don't need that other woman to tell you that you're wonderful. You are wonderful, and God believes you are wonderful, and I can deal with it. I have a way to say, I don't need to be dependent on another woman. I don't need somebody else to fill all my needs, because I have already healed. I have begun to find ways to fill myself in healthy ways. So my therapy is much more focused on this broader perspective of a woman's whole life, her whole life. It is not honoring to think that we can just reach into a woman's sexuality and say, we're just going to try to work on sexuality. We're just going to see if we can fix or change your sexuality. We can't do that because sexuality for women is merged into their emotionality and their relationships and their self-concept and their spirituality. And sexuality is a sacred thing. It's a very powerful thing that God has given us, and it's meant to image aspects of the Trinity and aspects of how He loves us. It is not something that we can just turn the switch on or off. No simplistic answers. It is about working with the woman as a whole being and honoring all aspects of her life as we explore together how sexuality has played a role, how it has been wounded, how it has been misused, etc. So there are some theories. I'm not going to go through those theories because I want to share with you mine. Because mine is uniquely based on working with women. And so what I have observed over the years. So if I were to come up with what I believe are genetic or biological aspects of women with same-sex attraction, here is my list. My observations are, over the years, is that I work with a very special population of women. They are incredibly gifted. I suspect if we did research, we would find above average IQ. Very smart, intelligent women. These are women who have this, and I believe, inborn gift and tendency to deeply reflect about life. These are women who are deeply sensitive. in the sense that as little girls, they could feel what mother was feeling. They could feel what dad was feeling. They could sense and feel the dynamics in the family system. They were very aware of these underlying currents. And because they're also very smart, they tended to come up with explanations, right? Explanations of why the world was working the way it did. Unfortunately, little children often come up with very black and white categories, magical thinking, and so their understanding of the world wasn't always totally accurate. And much of the problem when we become adults is that our thinking is very childish, and yet we're still living out of this childish thinking. And I see that very much in the women that I work with. They are very, I just said observant, but very curious. These women are scientists in some ways. They're very curious. They want to understand how things work. They don't take life on a superficial level. They want depth. In fact, and I forgot to put it on this list, I think these women have a profound capacity to feel deeply. Very, very deep emotions, very deep feeling. And the picture I have is that somehow, we are reflecting the image of God, and we embody as female, we embody aspects of who God is. And I just have this picture of us as women is that we somehow expand to hold God. We hold his deep heart of compassion. He has a deep heart of compassion, and in fact is willing to sacrifice for the sake of being in relationship. And I see this in the women that I work with, this deep sense of knowing that we are made for relationship. We are made for connection. We are made for closeness. And as I've listened to the women describe these deep longings, often in relationship to other women, the desire they have for closeness, I have actually learned about the importance and significance of connection and relationship and intimacy. Somehow they hold this, which may explain why, as little girls, when some of these relationship needs weren't met, and not because mom and dad were bad, but because mom and dad were doing the best they could, but they didn't come with a full tank to start with. So these girls, where they're not experiencing the closeness or the attunement or the empathy, is that they feel this wound very deeply. It goes down to the very being and possibly into their identity as female. And it begins to be questioned, and the pain goes very deep, very deep. These are women who have this great sensitivity for the injustices in the world. So many women that I've worked with fight for causes. They fight for the oppressed. They fight for populations that are being discriminated against. And this is why we see a lot of lesbians who are activists, and they're fighting against discrimination of lesbian and gay people, because they see it as a human injustice. It's not that they're saying, oh, you should just be happy that we're all gay. They're saying we are human beings and we deserve to be treated with respect. But they spot injustices all over the world, and will travel all over the world to fight injustices. And when I work with parents, we have parents come to the retreats. I always have the parents describe their daughters. Just tell me who your daughters are. And this is the kind of list we come up with over and over again. The parents will say, oh, my daughter is so passionate about, for instance, the Africans right now who are being subject to Ebola. My daughter is so passionate that she is already planning how she is a nurse, and she's planning on making a trip to help in any way that she can. I mean, the parents see these traits. So a lot of the women are extremely they have a lot of energy, they're adventurous, and many are gender non-conforming. Not all, And some of the younger women, I'm not seeing the gender nonconformity as much with some of the younger women, but certainly the older women that I've worked with often exhibit the gender nonconformity, which can lead to, again, a gender confusion inside of them. They don't know, are they real girl? Are they beautiful enough? Are they valuable enough? Gender nonconformity often leads to gender insecurity and gender confusion, which can then set up a young man and a young woman later to experience a need to connect with their gender, internally and externally, relationally. If I hate myself as female, there is always going to be an emptiness inside of me until I reach a place of acceptance that I am female, and how do I now live as a unique female and express my femininity in my special way. That's always a need. Okay. We're good. Time.